Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Get to know the real estate ecosystem at Real-Estate.Channel, your go to podcast for unfiltered stories from the people shaping the real estate market. Now, in our last episode, we discussed something powerful, teaching real estate concepts to high school students. We talked about teens often grasp foundational principles faster than adults. Early exposures build long term ethical thinking, and sometimes younger students ask clearer, sharper questions than seasoned professionals, which raises an important point. In high school students, if high school students can understand responsibility, fairness, and long term impact, why do so many licensed agents still misunderstand fiduciary duty and fair housing? Two terms every agent believes they understand, which is fiduciary duty and fair housing. But do they really truly understand those terms legally and ethically? Hey, Jeffrey, welcome back to the show, and let's go deeper to understand these terms better.
Sure. Hi, Anisha. Great to see you again.
Jeff, I would like to start with the basic question. What is fiduciary duty in simple language?
Sure. Fiduciary duty is about trust and confidence in whoever you're working with. It's working with an agent or an attorney or even a financial advisor who knows that their client's interests are first above all others, including their own. So that's the main purpose of fiduciary duties. It is basically a part of the law of agency in which we must adhere to if we represent the client. But conversely, there are some agents in New Jersey, also another form of client, what's the best way to say it? Client assistance, known as transactional agents. Transactional agent has no fiduciary responsibility to their client. Their job is just to find them a house, right? So when we talk about what are the duties of fiduciary relationship, I'll explain the differences of transactional versus having that representation as an agent or as an attorney or as an investment advisor on why fiduciary responsibility or fiduciary relationship is much greater for a client to work with.
So now let's go one level deeper. What is the difference between, let's start with basics, legal obligation, ethical responsibility, and moral judgment?
So legal is black and white, right? The laws are black and white. Speed limit's 55, it's 55. Not that I ever stay to that. Don't tell anybody. That's legal, right? You either can do it or not do it. So that's your basic black and white. Then there's ethics. Ethics is gray, right? Every company should have a code of ethics, and it's a way to do business. Now, as a realtor, we have what is known as the Realtor Code of Ethics, which we can go into a little more after we talk about morality, because that's different, because ethics are written and it's a way to do business. Okay, so let's go back first to ethics. Ethics are something that are written that in business you should adhere to, right? But there's gray areas in ethics. Morality is different. Morality is deeper. Morality is in your gut, in your heart. It's the way you were brought up, the way your religious organizations had told you to treat other people. That's morality. And every different background may have different morals because that's the way they were brought up. Not to say they were good or bad, because we want morals to be good, obviously, because morals is what you want to sleep with, right? You want to go to bed knowing you have good morals and wake up the next morning feeling you did everyone right, right? So it's really what's inside of you is what morals are. It's almost like morals are a higher being than ethics and the law.
Have you seen any agents comply legally but fail ethically?
Sure. Not as much as people think, because real estate agents have a bad reputation of putting themselves in front of others. People think that it's only because we want our commission, but we really do try to set ourselves to a higher standard. Not all of us do, but the majority of us do. But because of those few that don't, it hurts our reputation. But here's an example of what happened many years ago. And it's one that you see a little more often than not. And it's not specific, but what I've seen is that there are times when an agent will disparage another company, right? You're at a listing appointment and you say, my company does this, and you wouldn't want to use that company because they're not good or they don't do anything right. So legally that's allowed, but ethically it is not allowed. in our realtor code of ethics, we are not allowed to disparage other companies. So that is an actual ethics violation, but it's not a law. I mean, anyone can make fun of another company. So I've seen that happen. So I think that's bad business, first of all, because you never want to put down your competition because it actually makes you look worse, right? Instead, and also it is one in which maybe that seller or that buyer didn't even think of that company. So now they say, oh, this other company's competition, maybe they're really good, so I should give them a call. So I've seen that happen. I've seen other incidences happen as well. I just can't pin anything down right now. So
Okay.
maybe we'll go back to that. All right.
Sure.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is the gray area that you were talking about, right? If I'm not wrong.
Correct. There's always a gray area. Legally, it's okay, but ethically, it's not. You know, there's things that people do that sort of bend the rules of ethics, but it's
Mm-hmm.
never against the law.
And
So,
then coming back to the moral judgment that we were discussing. So, where does the company stand in those terms?
well, companies got to sort of put their moralities in their code of ethics or in their ethics policies or their policies and procedures. That's the best way to do it. But again, morals are different. You know, different religions have different set of values, right?
Sure.
So, for instance, during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
right? Remember COVID? We all remember COVID, and there were hospitals that were running out of ventilators. So the question was, who do we give the ventilators to? Do we give it to the older person who wasn't going to live anyway, or do we give it to someone younger? That's a moral question that someone's got to answer, and that is up to the person doing it. Or when you look at something like, so in other words, what is justified? Or when you look at when there's a big storm, for instance, what happened in down south at New Orleans, I think it was Sandy or one of those huge storms. The question was like people were ransacking the stores, right? But they were doing it maybe to feed their kids and their family versus doing it because they were stealing TVs. Where is the fine line? Right? Both are against the law, but which one is morally?
Okay, Jeff. So, for new agents listening to this show, what are 5 pillars of fiduciary duty they must understand before ever representing a client?
Well, actually, 5 could really be 6. And that can be done what is known as the acronym OLD CAR. OLD CAR. How's it broken down? O is obedience, right? You do what your client asks you as long as it's ethically, legally, and morally okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if a seller says to you, well, my roof leaks, but don't tell anybody, that's actually illegal. Because as a real estate agent, I have to tell people. You have to disclose those things. But if a seller says, I don't want any showings, I need 24-hour notice for showings.
Mm-hmm.
All right? You have to
Yes.
oblige your client with that. That's being obedient. So that's important. The next one is L, loyalty. Loyalty is the hardest thing to attain, right? Because they've got to trust you. They've got to have confidence in you. They got to believe that their interests come first. But you have to be loyal to your clients, right? It's not about you. It's about what's best for them. You're not going to only show them houses that pay you the top price. You're going to show them houses that fit their description, fit their needs, and those wants that you have to throw in. So that is that loyalty. You have to prove yourself to get that loyalty back. So loyalty is important. The next one is D, disclosure. Disclose to your clients everything you know about a property and about what's going on, right? Don't hide it. Do not hide it. You must disclose as much as you can. Even if, like, for instance, a seller tells the buyer's agent, I'll give you a really good example. This one is actually a perfect one. I was working on a listing in my hometown, and it was a divorce situation, and in which the ex-husband and ex-wife, the couples that were divorcing absolutely hated each other. I mean, they wouldn't even talk to each other. And the name calling, you tell that B, well, you tell that F, this and that. So they wouldn't even talk to each other. They went through me. So
Okay.
anyway, and which always a very difficult situation with a divorce, but you've got to really handle it with kid gloves. And that's actually a moral thing too, because you can't side with one party or another. So every email that goes out must go out to both parties. You must treat them equally. So anyway, we have it for sale. They're home for sale, and we have two offers that come in from two different agents, and they're going back and forth. And one of the agents says, "I have 275. But I know I can get 290, right?"
Yeah.
But he didn't have the 290 yet. So now he already ruined his fiduciary responsibility because he actually took something confidential and told me. My job as a seller's agent is to say, yes, they have 275, but they will go up to 290 because I was told by the buyer's agent that they would. So I had to disclose that. I couldn't hide that. So anyway, if that information got back to that agent's buyer, that buyer would have been really upset because they could have said, yeah, I can go to 290, but I don't want to pay 290. Now, luckily for him, they accepted the other offer, but he really shirked on his fiduciary responsibility. He gave away that information, which he shouldn't have. I used to manage a real estate office, and one of the agents in my office, and I can name her because I name her in all my classes. Her name is Jean McKenna, a wonderful woman, a wonderful agent. I mean, she was really great. And she had a listing, and she had a buyer that was interested in listing, and then she had another buyer that was interested in this listing. So now she had two buyers for her own listing. So there you had three people involved with the same transaction.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever was told her in confidentiality, which we'll talk about in a second, she had to keep with her so that she didn't have to put one buyer against another, because that would have been wrong. But she did disclose to all parties that she was working with both buyers and the seller. So she was upfront with everybody. One of the buyers ended up winning the house, and the other buyer stayed with her, and she sold that person another house because she kept her fiduciary responsibilities, putting their trust and confidence in her, and she putting their interests of theirs first. So anyway, that's disclosure. Always tell your clients everything that you know about the property that they're buying. One thing you can't do, though, is you can't disclose, then we'll talk about this later, demographic makeup of an area, even if they ask you, because that's against the law. And we'll talk more
Okay.
about that in a little bit. The next one is C, confidentiality. They tell you something in confidence, it remains with you in confidence forever. Not just for the transaction, forever. Like if they tell you they're selling because they're getting a divorce, but don't tell anybody, you can't tell anybody. You can't even, after the transaction closes, you still can't tell anybody. You got to be careful. I mean, you could be sitting at a restaurant and tell whoever you're sitting with, the Smiths are getting a divorce, and all of a sudden the Smiths are sitting at the next table, or a friend of theirs is sitting at the next table. So now
Yeah.
they hear it for the first time, oh, the Smiths are getting a divorce. And they go to the Smiths, they said, I just heard you're getting a divorce. How'd you find out? Well, my realtor, a realtor that was sitting at the next table was talking to his family about it. And what I mean by not always keeping in confidence, because that's the same thing with attorneys. Attorneys have to keep things in confidence forever as well. Is that, say, for instance, I sold a couple a home, and they're buying the home because they're trying to save their marriage, right? Because they're
Yes.
thinking of getting divorced, but they think this house is going to work, which usually doesn't. But anyway, a year and a half later, the house is back on the market. And they didn't list with that agent that's with me, just say. And the reason why they didn't list is because maybe I was friends with the husband and not the wife. So the wife didn't feel comfortable hiring the same agent because I might be siding with the husband. So they end up listing maybe with a court-appointed real estate agent, or maybe one of the divorce attorneys recommends a non-biased agent, someone they don't know at all, to list the house. So now you have the scenario. Now I have a buyer for that house, and I know the reason why they're selling is because they're probably getting a divorce. I cannot tell that buyer that the reason why they're selling, I think, is because they're getting a divorce, because that's against the law. And agents have to realize that when someone tells you in confidence, it stays with you forever. Because if I could tell my buyer they were getting a divorce, their negotiating stance would be far greater than if they didn't know, right?
Got it.
They're
Yes.
desperate. They got to sell. So they could probably get it for a steal. So that's really important. It's how you represent your buyer, how you represent your seller. I've seen agents that will come into an office and say, guess what? I just got this listing. they're getting a divorce, and I know they're going to sell it for $50,000 less than what they're asking. And everybody in the office hears about it. So now they can all tell their buyers, guess what? We just listed a property in such and such, and you can get it for $50,000 less because they're getting a divorce. That's really scary. When you find something and someone tells you in confidence, it's got to stay in your head. It can't come out of your mouth. And remember we talked about how agents really talk too much, like I am right now? Okay. Well, they do the same thing. Those things come out of your mouth. I read a really good book, and I think I told you, like, Know When to Shut Up. It's a great book. People need to know when to shut up, like I am now. The next one is accounting. A for accounting. So you have OLD, A is accounting, meaning keeping track of the transaction, keeping track of the monies that are coming in to make sure that those monies that are coming in are going towards the purchase and not into the broker's pocket. That's a simple one. It's all about numbers. The last one, which is the one that is most agents are actually sued for, is reasonable care and diligence, knowing what you are doing. Matter of fact, that's the one that hits the most against agents. Like, for instance, if you're selling in a town, know something about the town. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know something. When you're selling a home, know about the home, right? A lot of agents some agents don't even go into basements. They have no idea. We talked about this between a boiler and a furnace. I mean, little things like that. Know what's going on in the transaction. Everything's on the timeline. Make sure those things get done in the timeline, because that's that reasonable care. Don't go into real estate or part of real estate that you don't know what you're doing until you know. For instance, if you're selling mostly residential properties and you have someone that comes up to you, you sold a house, who says, I'm thinking of buying a commercial building. Can you help me out?
In the middle of the deal?
And I'm sorry?
In the middle of the deal?
No, maybe afterwards. So maybe they've closed on a house and they said, you know what, you did a great job selling my home. I would like to buy some commercial real estate. And maybe that agent never sold a commercial piece of real estate before. And again, that's a very different type of sale. So they need to get help. Doesn't mean they can't learn it, but they can't just say, sure, I can do it, because they've never done before. That's not reasonable care. They better get someone who's an expert in commercial real estate and work with that person who's a commercial agent, or maybe just refer it out and let that agent do everything. I mean, it's also when I talked about towns before. For instance, I know where I live in my town, I know pretty much everything about the town, but I know very little about South Jersey and some town down there. I have no idea. So I really don't know the town. I can't explain what's going on with whatever it is. So I may want to just say, look, I don't know anything about that town. Would you like me to refer that person, refer you to an agent down there? Or if you don't mind, I'd be happy to help you. I just want you to be aware that I'm not familiar with that property. If that buyer or that seller are okay with the fact that you disclose to them that you don't know that business or you don't know that area, and they're okay with it, it's okay to do it because the fact that they've allowed you to do it. But if they don't, or they don't feel comfortable, then you've got to get someone else to help you. Because I'm going to tell you, that's where a lot of litigation comes, because you're doing something you have no idea. Like, we go back to that same person, the woman that found the wrong house for the school system, right? She was sued because of reasonable care. She should have known better. You should know what you're doing. We are paid money to know what we're doing. And if you don't know, then get help. So that's that old car.
You have explained it with examples wonderfully well.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Jeff. So, which of these do agents most commonly misunderstand?
The one they most commonly misunderstand, well, care is one of them. And the other one is, the other one I think is confidentiality.
Okay.
Because they don't realize that, again, the confidentiality remains with them forever. So it can really bite them in the butt if it comes out of their mouth at the wrong time, at the wrong place, at the wrong situation. Yeah. Get excited when you're, at home. You could jump around because you made that sale. Especially for new agents, when you make a first sale, it's really exciting.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jeff, now let's talk about fair housing. Firstly, please explain to our audience what is fair housing And most agents believe they would never discriminate. But where do unintentional violations actually happen?
Okay, so fair housing is the ability for everybody who can afford to live in an area deserve to live in that area. Fair housing came about originally in 1866 in the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was signed by President Lincoln. That was a couple years before my time. And that started out saying that anyone of race and color have the right to own property, will property, sell property, buy property. It was an extension of the Civil Rights Act. Because up until that time, slaves were considered 3/5 of a person. Pretty scary, right? Yeah. 68, President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, which then added race, color, creed, national origin, and sex. And then there were amendments added where more and more classes were added to the Civil Rights Act. By the way, it's the Civil Rights Act of 64, not 68. Sorry. So that's what real estate is. That's what the Fair Housing Act is treating everybody equally because they deserve to live where they can afford to live. And not assuming because someone is who they are, they should live in the areas that you think they should live in. There's topics like blockbusting and steering and so forth, and redlining, which are three aspects of how people were treated by real estate agents and so forth. Blockbusting is when real estate agents go into a neighborhood and they say, you better sell because these people are moving in and the value is going to go down or it's going to go up. Steering is when you take a person to a neighborhood that you think they should live in because that's who they are, or steering people to live in that neighborhood. A good example is when it says, when the ad says walk to a bodega. So the first assumption is it must be an Hispanic neighborhood, right? That's steering. When you say you can walk to an Orthodox temple, that means that there are Orthodox Jews that live there. That's steering. Or when I take someone who's African American and I only take them to a neighborhood there are African Americans. I have a great example for that. A year or two after I started in real estate, I started working with this gentleman who was a black gentleman. And at that time, we used to take people in our car and drive them to houses to take a look at. First thing he said to me when we met is, I do not want to live in a strictly black neighborhood. By the way, that didn't even cross my mind. But obviously he went through that with some other real estate agent. So that's that part. I mean, I can go hours and hours on fair housing, because another part is when your client directs you into being discriminatory. Sure. Well, when I started a while ago, bigotry was a little more blatant, right? So I would go to a house to take a listing, and I remember one person said, I don't want those type of people buying my house. And I'm not going to tell you what type of people. So I said, well, I can't do that. So I walked away. But I asked them at the time, so why not? I said, because those people are going to bring the value down in my neighborhood. But you're selling it and they have money. It doesn't matter. It's going to help my neighbors. It's like, really? So that was pretty blatant back then. Now you have closet bigots. They don't tell you up front that they don't want those people to come in, but you get it out of them one way or another during your transaction or so forth. So there's a lot of ways to avoid that. For instance, when you get an offer on a property, don't give the name of the buyer because you're protecting your seller then. Just say, I have a buyer. They're paying this amount of money. Here's their down payment, mortgage, closing date, whatever the contingencies are. Instead of saying, here's a buyer, their name is da, which means, wait a minute, I don't want those people. So the seller said, no, I'm not going to accept it, especially when it comes to multiple offer situations where you have 4 or 5 offers on one house. You don't put names there because people are up against others. You put buyer 1, buyer 2, buyer 3, buyer 4. The other thing too is you see thing was called love letters. Love letters are when a buyer writes a letter to the seller saying how much they love the house. As a seller's agent, I tell the seller, try not to take love letters, because if you choose one person over another, the other person might think you're discriminating against them because you don't like who they are or you don't like their name or something like that.
So that means love letters are not allowed in a deal.
They're allowed legally because
Okay.
there was a case in Oregon where there was a company that was promoting love letters, and the Board of Realtors said you can't do it. So they sued the Board of Realtors and they won for Article 1 on the Constitution, free speech.
Yes.
Like as a buyer's agent, I love my buyers to write love letters. I don't want their picture in it. I don't want them to tell them, I also look like you, so you want to choose me. I want their letters to be representative. I love the house because it's great for my family to get started or whatever it is, but it's got to be very non-racial, non-discriminatory. But as a seller's agent, I tell my seller, don't look at them. I don't want you to get in trouble for fair housing. Even if you are non-discriminatory, it doesn't matter because a lot of it is perception more than anything else.
So, Jeff, if I'm understanding this right, we can legally write love letters once the deal is done. Then it's, I
No,
think,
actually, the love
okay.
letters are written with the offer.
Okay.
Here's my offer. It's $500,000, and the reason why we want this house is because we love it and all that. So
Okay.
you had asked me about agents, correct? And what they
Yes.
find. Okay. So agents run into problems when they think they're helping somebody and they're trying to be really fair and trying to do best for them when it may not be, or the perception will be different. So, for instance, one of the things that is who's protected are those that are disabled. So say, for instance, you're taking out a family and their child is blind. And you decide, I'm only going to show them houses on the cul-de-sac because it's much safer for that blind child. You as an agent have no right to do that unless the buyer asks you to. You need to introduce them to every house that's available in their price range in the areas that they want, right? Now, if they tell you, I don't want a main street, that's different, but you can't assume it. Or when it comes to protecting male or female, the protection of which sex they are. So I'm a real manly man, and I'm there to protect women. And I have a client, she's a single woman. She wants to find an apartment. I found a couple apartments available in one apartment building. One's on the first floor, one's on the fifth floor. I don't show her the first floor because the window's at ground level, because I'm trying to protect her, because I'm her hero.
Yes.
It's against the law. That's not mine. That's, it's their money. Yeah. So, and then the other part too with agents is the biggest problem they run into is when they tell jokes, how they tell them, because that could also be perception. Sure. So I'm at a party, not me, but an agent's at a party and he's telling a joke about some kind of demographic, and it doesn't matter what. And it's everyone laughs except for the person that's standing a little farther away, and they are that person. And then they find out that you are telling a joke about their people. So their feeling now is, their perception is, you're going to discriminate against my people because you're making fun of my people. So now that's a fair housing violation because it's perception. Because once you get your real estate license, you have to be apolitical, asexual. You have to be non-discriminatory. You have to be careful what you say because it could come back to you. And agents got to realize that. Or if I tell you a joke about one party, one type of demographic, and then you tell that same joke to someone else, and then they say, wow, that's so funny. Where'd you hear that joke from? Jeff the realtor told me. Or you go into your office and you say, those damn whatever people, they're so cheap they never pay full price. And all of a sudden you have another family that's in the other conference room that are those people, and they hear this. That's a fair housing violation. They all think that we're like that, so they're being stereotyped. They're stereotyping us. Means they're probably discriminating against us.
That simply means that agents should keep their personal feelings within themselves.
Yep. And not just like what comes out of their mouth, what they write, what they post, what they agree to on other people's posts, or if they put something in there. Like, for instance, they put a new listing online, and then all of a sudden someone in their thread says, I would never live there because those people live there. Now, not to say that the agent's going to be sued because it's been proven that they won't be, but the fact that you keep it as a thread on your post, people may think that, oh my gosh, I guess he's okay with making fun of those people because they never took down that post. So maybe you won't be sued, or you might be. And the liability is tremendous when you discriminate. Tremendous. Not just the fines from the federal government and the state government. I mean, on your first offense, it could cost you $40,000 from the state and the federal government. But then you could be sued, and then we have to pay treble damages, and there's a lot. So that's why you have to be really careful. And even though you may not be the one discriminating, meaning your client is, if they list with you or they sign up with you, you are just as liable as they are.
Jeff, I have a point. For example, you just shared that if an agent has posted a listing and in their threads, if somebody else have come and commented something bad on the post, so what should the agent do then? Because he just posted a listing. He doesn't commented back on the thread. Somebody else did. What should he or she do in that particular situation?
I would take down the list. I would take down the thread, delete it. I mean, some agents are terrible. There was actually, it's a good example because we cannot advertise any discriminatory anything, right? We can't even say no kids because that's also against the law because family size is protected. Family is protected.
Fair
There
enough.
was a agent's team in which used to be in the company I work for. They are no longer there. They went to another company and they posted a video where they're sitting in their office. And I could say it this way because this really happened. They're sitting in their office and they get a lead. So the office has the name of our company behind them. So now the office is liable. And they say, hey, look, we just got a lead. And their name ends with a vowel. And so the other guy says, wait a minute. That sounds like they're Italian. Granted, this is against the law. And it happens that the agents are also Italian. So they think that's okay. They're Italian. They can say Italian. The next scene is they're knocking at this seller's house and they're dressed up in a stereotypical sweatsuits like you would see in mafia movies.
Hmm?
And they were like they put orange makeup on their face,
Okay.
like they were in tanning beds, and they changed their whole accent to try to be like tough guys, like forget about it and a couple other more choice words. Totally against the law. Matter of fact, I wasn't managing the office, but I called the manager up. He said, you got to tell these people to take this down. This is blatant discrimination. Even though it was themselves, meaning they were Italian, it was still wrong. So you can't even do self-deprecation when you're talking about different types of people. It's very, I mean, they're lucky they never got caught. Because if I was, say I was an Italian that didn't believe in these stereotypes, I would have called fair housing. I would have called the federal government. I would call the states and look at this. This is a blatant discriminatory act. And that's with everything. There was a developer in Washington, D.C. about 20 years ago, and he was developing properties that were very high end. And all his ads had lily white people, right? Everybody's white. So there was an African American that sued the developer because he felt that he was not allowed to buy there because none of his people were in the ad. He sued the developer. He won. The developer was fined. The developer then changed all his ads to make it more, fully exclusive. I mean, non-exclusive. They either, if you look at advertising today, all ads in the U.S., if anybody coming from another country would think that we're all families of mixed races because all our ads have mixed races. And there's a reason why they do this because they don't want to be sued. They want to be inclusive of everybody. I get it. But real estate agents have to think that all the time. All the time.
The different situations that you have just shared, they can be they can fall under jeopardizing a particular deal, right? This can
Oh,
be
yeah.
the best examples that fit in jeopardized deals.
So what are the best examples? Well, they definitely jeopardize deals because if you were someone who has, well, actually, here's a real example. So several years ago in a farmhouse in Idaho, there was a woman who owned a farm and she needed a handyman to be around the house, whatever the chores were, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So she had an extra room in her property. So she advertised for a Christian handyman. That was a blatant fair housing violation. But she didn't know that. She was a single person, older woman that owned her own place, and she just wanted someone to be there to help. So she was sued by someone else. I have no idea who. She ended up losing the lawsuit. She ended up being fined by the federal government, and she ended up losing her farm because of
Oh my
the
God.
cost it was. So that does happen.
What is the most dangerous phrase a new agent can say without realizing the consequences?
New?
Or any agent?
Okay. You mean pertaining to fair housing?
Yes, because new agents, well, I said new agents because they are very new and they don't know anything. They are just exploring the field. But
Yeah.
the older agents, even they can do something or use a dangerous phrase that is not allowed without even realizing it.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of phrases, but the most dangerous is okay, you wouldn't want to live in that neighborhood. There is a story that was put out by Newsday in 2018 or 19, which they used undercover testers to test real estate agents in Long Island. Now, you would think Long Island, New York would be very integrated, but Long Island is the most segregated area in the country, which is weird because it's in the East, but it's
Yeah.
not. So so a lot of what they said is, they actually showed agents that were steering people out of areas and into areas. And the biggest thing that came up is you wouldn't really want to live there. So it was almost like a little bit of a undertone of those, because you are this color, you probably wouldn't want to live in that area. So it's those little nuances that are going to persuade a person to buy or not buy. But it is those nuances that perception wise would be discriminatory. Like, for instance, they had one test where they had a white person go and wanted to see houses, but they weren't pre-approved yet.
Huh?
So the agent said, that's okay, let's go out anyway. Then there was a black person that came to the same agent, and these were real agents that wanted the same type of neighborhood. And the agent said, were you pre-approved yet? She said, no, not yet, but I know my husband's going to get pre-approved. And she said to him, I can't show you until you're pre-approved. So that's discriminatory, treating one person different than another. So it's those things those little nuances that are really key. You wouldn't want to live in that neighborhood. There are so many things that agents say which are enough to sway people to buy in an area or not. Like one of the things they said is, I can't tell you who lives there, but if you go in the morning and go watch the school bus stop and see what kind of kids get on the school bus, you will know what kind of area there is. That's discriminatory, right? Whereas instead, because I always stay away from statistics, but you can send them to a third party site, which will give you those statistics, which means not my fault. I didn't tell you. This third party site told you. There's a site called city-data.com, which basically has the breakdown of demographics.
Yeah.
I didn't pose them. I just said, here's a site. I don't know how accurate it is, but you could take a look at it because it also has crime rates and things like that.
So then they can make their own decisions.
Correct. And then the buyers don't ask you those questions. And the question they'll ask is not, are there any this type of people there? They're gonna say something like, well, what kind of neighborhood is this? So it's a great neighborhood. No, you know what I mean. What kind of neighborhood is this? You know what they're asking, but I can't tell them. So a lot of this has to be when you first meet with a buyer, your consultation with them is what you can and can't do, right? You can't ask me about demographics. It's against the law. You can't ask me about things like that, like demographics. You can't ask me about child predators because there's a law called Megan's Law in New Jersey, which I cannot say. You can't ask me if there's a group home in the neighborhood because I can't tell you that. They're protected people. So so you're basically training your buyers on what to do. Same thing with a seller. When the seller says, I don't want those kind of people living here, you got to walk away. Even though all sellers are required to sign an attorney general memorandum from the state of New Jersey that talks about how a seller cannot discriminate. And there's a lot of other things. So it's 5 pages long and they have to sign it.
Mm-hmm.
So that at least protects you as the agent because you're the agent signing as well. And that's required by law, by the way. But that allows the seller to know they can't discriminate. And the only color they have to worry about is what? Green. Money is green. That's all that matters.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so Jeff, I would like to go back a little bit on fiduciary duty.
Okay.
So many agents think fiduciary duty only protects the client. How does it also protect the agents? Can you walk us through a situation where clear documentation, proper disclosure, or refusing to follow a client's request actually saved an agent from liability?
Sure. So in the state of New Jersey, it's required that a buyer signs a buyer representation agreement if the agent's going to represent them. And in that buyer's agency agreement is signed by the buyer and signed by the agent. So the agent has their fiduciary responsibilities basically spelled out. And the buyer has the same thing. This is what to expect. So it kind of protects both parties. As a matter of fact, let's step back one. When we first meet with a client, before they tell us their motivation or their financial situation, whether it's a buyer or a seller, we must give them what is known as the consumer information statement and explain to them the difference between a buyer's agent, one who represents the buyer, a seller's agent, one who represents the seller in that fiduciary way, a disclosed dual agent, which is an agency or an agent that represents both the buyer and seller, a designated agent, which happens when there's a buyer and seller that are looking at they're going together, and then the buyer says to the agent, I really don't want to use you as my agent because you are the listing agent. So can your broker assign me to another agent within your, so the broker then assigns another agent, they designate agents. Now, therefore, there are two people being represented. Even though it is still dual agency because the company represents both, each agent's kind of overseeing their own individual clients. And then the last thing is that transactional broker, which I told you. Transactional broker means you don't have a fiduciary responsibility. So anything that the buyer or seller tells the transactional broker has the right to tell the other. So there's paperwork that people sign that talks about who's responsible for what. And in a buyer's agency agreement, a buyer has the right to fire their agent. Okay, usually with 3 days notice, but every company has a little bit different, different requirement on how to fire your agent. So the agent's got to be accountable to their client, and the clients sort of kind of be accountable to the agent. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, Jeff, that does. Now, I would like to understand regarding the documentation habits. Like, what documentation habits should new agents build immediately as soon as they're about to close a deal?
Well, the first one is having them sign that consumer information statement, which we just talked about, right? And if they agree to work with you as an agent, get them to sign a buyer agency representation agreement or a listing agreement, whichever side you're on, buyer, seller, which then stipulates the ground rules is what it is. Then once that's done, and sometimes buyers don't want to sign a long-term buyer representation agreement just because, I get to work 6 months with this person, but they have the right to fire you. So some agents will say, look, since you don't know me, not really yet, I'll just ask you to sign a buyer representation agreement for a week, for a month. And then if you like the way we work together, then we can continue. So anyway, once that's done and you start showing them houses, and from there, if someone wants to make an offer in the state of New Jersey, they make the offer in residential, not in commercial. In residential, the agent completes a contract for them, which is basically fill in the blanks. The buyer signs it, offers presented to the seller signs it. So now in that contract, it has a lot about the relationship that both agents have with their clients. It also talks about, and there's a lot of things in the contract. Contract is like 14 pages long, but it protects both buyers and sellers and also the agent. And then it goes to an attorney for a review. If the buyer and seller decide they want to use an attorney, it's not required by law, but certainly highly recommended. Then the attorneys review the contracts and then they make their changes. So during attorney review period, other offers can come in and the seller can just say, I'll take another offer. And once the attorney review is done, then you're under contract. So up until during attorney review, it's an unenforceable contract. Once it's out of attorney review and under contract, it's now enforceable, right?
Understood.
So that contract's done.
Yes.
And then it go through the rest of the transaction. And then we hopefully close and happy buyer and happy seller.
Perfect. But Jeff, what happens when a client pressurizes an agent by saying that, hey, just leave that out? What should the agents do in that situation?
It's all according to what it is. If it's a material fact that must be disclosed, I can't leave it out. Leaky roof, basement water, things like that. That has to do with or if there's they find out that the next door house is being knocked down and they're putting up a gas station, I have to disclose that. Even though they would say to me, don't tell anybody, I have to disclose that. That's a material fact. If, say, for instance, I have a buyer and they lose their job, which means now they won't be able to get their mortgage because they have no more income coming in. And they say to me, don't tell the seller I lost my job because I know I'm going to get one in 2 months, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't get your mortgage. So I have to tell the other side, the seller's agent, sorry to say, but they lost their job. So therefore, there's a chance they may not get their mortgage. Or if they change mortgage companies, I have to do the same thing. Even if the buyer says, don't tell them I changed my mortgage company, I have to let them know because that changes the process. So it's the material facts that you need to always let the other party know. It's the things in confidence that you don't. Like, even if the buyer said, don't tell them, that's not in confidence because it's material fact. But if they say, don't tell them, but I have, God forbid, I have a disease. I mean, something silly like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't say because that's a different issue.
Understood. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for explaining everything so well.
Oh, thanks.
Now, Jeff, connecting back to the high school conversation like we had in our episode 3, why do you think younger students sometimes grasp fairness and fiduciary thinking more clearly than adults?
I think it's because they don't know. So this is a first time for them. They've never really experienced fiduciary responsibilities unless their parents have and they've told them, their kids. Whereas when you get older, can't teach an old dog new tricks. And sometimes it's that life they've had that gets in the way of their thinking,
Yeah.
right? Kids are fresh, they're new. But going back to that though, which is an interesting question, we talk about ethics and morals and so forth. You learn from your parents. Like going back to fair housing, you might have a parent that's just a bigot, and that's all you've known. So that's in your head that those people are not right,
Yeah.
and so forth. And they don't deserve to live there, things like that. So really, upbringing is a big factor in a kid's thinking. So there's two ways to look at it. Or if a kid's a rebel, they don't want to do anything that their parents do. So this actually, and if their parents are not good people, then maybe the kids will actually cling on to this. It's a real like crapshoot in some ways, you know. But I mean, most kids though, they're sponges and they want to learn and they get a lot out of it. Hopefully, it's not just for if they go in the real estate business, but just for their lives forever. Whether it's good ethics, good morals, fiduciary responsibility, because no, probably maybe 2 will get their real estate license that are in my class, maybe more. That would be great. But they'll become lawyers, accountants. So this stuff works for them for a lot of other industries.
Okay. So, Jeff, now what can adults learn from younger students when it comes to clarity and accountability?
What can adults learn from students? I think what they can learn is that students can learn. I know this is silly, but
Yeah.
students actually learn. They pay attention. They take notes. They get excited. I mean, I look at my high school students versus my adult students. I know that they're paying attention. I mean, not all the time. Adult students, I have no idea.
Yeah.
All I know is because I do usually do classes through virtually. So, and I don't see their faces. So, meaning the adults. So all I see is all these black boxes. So I have no idea if they're paying attention. But I do know that the passing rate in New Jersey for adult students for the New Jersey real estate exam is under 30%,
Yeah.
which means they're not paying attention. Oh, it just so happens the school I work for, it's a 70% passing rate for the state exam because we use lots of different tools to help them. So, and I think the students are more interested, they're more engaged, and they don't know. So it's something new. Whereas the adults think they do know because they see it all on TV, HGTV and all those other shows that you can buy a house in 30 minutes. So their perception is because of their life, of what's happened to them, what they've seen other people go through. Whereas kids, they haven't gone through that. So this is all new. So I think that's the difference. I think if adults took it as, let's just make it like we are kids again and just take it as we don't know anything about real estate. So then we have a clear head. I think that's the best way that an adult can take away from a kid, from a high school kid.
Now, Jeff, so what happens when a buyer asks you, is this neighborhood safe for families like us? What would will be your reaction on this?
Well, I say every neighborhood's different, and the perception of safety is different as well. So if you really want to know, instead of me telling you, do your due diligence and go ask the police department. Go into that site I told you, city-data.com. That's where you're going to know, because crime rates can change overnight. You could be in a neighborhood that nothing has happened in years, and all of a sudden somebody's murdered the night before. Crime rate would just went up 100%. So I won't be specific. That's one thing you got to do. Let them find other sources, because you can know about a place and maybe I wouldn't live there, but maybe they would. Maybe I wouldn't never live in this house, but maybe they would. My first broker said something to me which was so instrumental in my real estate life. It says, you don't know where people come from. Something you would never live in might be a castle to them. So you need to get as excited as they are about it. And that was a great thing to say. So, sometimes I tell agents, if you can, Google where your buyers are coming from, their address, and they have a picture of the house or whatever, and you'll know maybe where they're coming from, that you can determine, you know what? I just need to find them something nicer, not something that's 3 million. Maybe they're in the 600,000 range, but it's far better than that. When we used to drive buyers around, once in a while, I would actually go pick the buyer up from their house, and they may invite me in. And then not only did I see where they live, but I saw their furniture. And you're saying, well, what do you care? I said, because when you find a house that they're interested in, you say, your brown couch would look great over in that corner.
Lovely.
So now you start moving them in.
It's beautiful. Okay, so next scenario would be a seller tells you, don't mention that water issue. It only happens sometimes. What is your move?
My move is I can't do that. I could just say, and you shouldn't do it either, because at some point they're going to find out. And if they find out and I didn't tell them and you didn't tell them, they can go after us. It's a material fact you must say. Plus, you want to tell the buyer everything up front, because they know what they're buying and they know what they're getting themselves into. And legally, by law, you have to complete this property disclosure form. So you have to disclose it, because I'm telling you, it's worse. It'll cost you more in the long run than saving yourself a couple bucks now.
And now a buyer asks you to avoid showing homes in certain areas based on personal preferences. How do you respond without violating fair housing?
Well, they're asking you. You're not bringing them there. They're asking you. But you need to be able to introduce them to houses that may be outside the area that fit their parameters. Not take them there. Just let them know. We have a system in our company, and there's also a lot of systems that automatically sends the newest listings to your buyers on a daily basis. Okay. So they get to choose what houses they want to see. So put the onus on the buyer, not on yourself. The buyer wants to live. So I'll give you a good example. The Orthodox Jewish religion, on Fridays and Saturdays, they don't drive, but they must be able to walk to temple. So therefore, they have to be sort of close, because they need to walk there. So maybe in an area where there's a temple, it's a 6-block radius, right? But you can't just show them the 6-block radius. You must introduce them to, meaning tell them about houses that may be available on the 8th block or the 10th block. Because those areas, when the communities grow, they grow out, right? Because you can't fit everybody within 6 blocks. So now all of a sudden, the community's getting bigger, and you're only telling them about houses within 6 blocks. But now the arc is now 8 blocks. But you didn't tell them about the house on the 7th block. It wasn't close enough. You could actually be guilty of steering. Doesn't mean you have to take them there. Just means you have to say that, oh, by the way, there's a house on the 8th block that just became available. And they'll tell you, no, I don't want that. I want to live 6 blocks with it, which limits you. So you got to be really, that's what you got to do. It's introduction. Let the buyer direct you. Just let them know what's available.
Understood. And now a broker says, just get the deal done. What does fiduciary duty requires you to do in that situation?
Well, a broker's got to realize that they have the same fiduciary duty to those clients as I do. As a matter of fact, in a brokerage, the broker of record is responsible for every single transaction in that office. They are the actual agent for the client. Me as an agent are the sub-agent of my broker, which means I'm the sub-agent of that client. So they would just be as liable as me, even more so. So they have to be careful. Now, if they say just make the deal work, you've got to tell your broker where it stands, and hopefully they'll understand. I mean, if a broker's only there for the numbers, then they shouldn't be the broker. And numbers are important to brokers because they got to pay the bills. I get it. Yeah. But they're responsible.
Very well. Very well said. Very well put. Okay, Jeff. So I would like to shift a little bit. It's on a session that says it's kind of a rapid fire where you would be sharing some mini knowledge with our audience.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I'm ready.
Perfect. So the first one is fiduciary duty optional?
Only if you're a transaction broker.
Okay.
Then you have no fiduciary duty. But otherwise, it's not. Once you have that responsibility, you've got to keep it.
Does fair housing apply in rentals?
Even more so. Usually it's landlords that are more discriminatory than agents or than sellers. I mean, today sellers just need to sell. And they're getting top dollar, and it's not that as important as it used to be. But landlords, extremely difficult to work with sometimes when they say no children, or I don't want those kind of people, or whatever, or they don't want. Or in New Jersey, there are those that are supplemented by the state, known as Section 8 tenants, right? And there are landlords that don't want Section 8 tenants. You can't do that. Landlords have to accept Section 8 tenants. And actually, Section 8 tenants are just as good as regular tenants, and the landlord automatically gets paid on the first. They don't have to chase the tenant. And landlords have to understand is that a clean person is a clean person and a pig is a pig. Doesn't matter where their income is coming from.
What should be done in such situations when the landlords are being very difficult?
With the type of people? Well, they're also signing the Attorney General memorandum that we discussed before. So they realize that they can't discriminate. So they know their understanding in the beginning. And remember, we have those closet bigots that don't do anything until it comes to a point where there's a tenant that they don't want to have there.
Yes.
You need to remind them that, as you remember when we first met, we both discussed about fair housing. Well, this is one of those situations.
Jeff, what is the worst case scenario if a landlord, even after knowing that they are in a contract, but they still says no to that particular tenant?
Well, if it's anything other than credit, income, then you need to, that's a tough one because you've already signed something. You need to get your broker involved, or you might need to wash your hands and just say, because of who you are, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to terminate our contract because I by law cannot do this. But still and document everything. Make sure you document everything. Maybe have the seller send you an email saying, I don't want these people because of the color of their skin, right? So then if you wash your hands with it, it wasn't your decision. You're still taking a chance. You know, sometimes you're just in a trap in a sense. So I know it's tough. There was I used to manage an office in Bergen County, and one of my agents in the office was a blatant discriminator, but I could never catch her or him. Okay, her or him. But the big thing was that she had a lot of clients in that town that didn't want kids. And that's against the law unless there's way too many people for the space. And so she wouldn't advertise no kids, but she would tell them in a way, say no kids. But I never caught her, and there was never a complaint against her. But I knew she was doing it. I just couldn't pin it. And her husband happened to be a cop in that town. Which was really like, really? So you can imagine if I'm stopped by that cop and I'm one of those people or I have kids, you know, because she did other things too. I just didn't catch her. And she was a high producing agent, or he.
And moving on to the next one, is ethical behavior always profitable short term?
Is ethical behavior what?
Always profitable short term?
And long term, more long term than short term, but yeah. Ethical behavior is good ethics, keeps you in business, keeps you out of lawsuits. Poor ethics, you could lose clients, a reputation, money, lawsuits.
Okay, so Jeff, the last thing that I want to know from you is what you can't in a disclosure. What is that thing that you cannot disclose?
Okay, so things you don't have to disclose. Well, you cannot disclose confidential information of a person's of one of your clients. Being confidential, non-material fact. Okay. Like,
Yes.
the reason why I'm selling is because my wife just passed away or my husband just passed away, but I don't want anyone to know that. That is, you can never say because it was told to you in confidence, or because we're getting a divorce, or I'm selling because I'm being relocated to another city, but I don't want you to say anything. That's something you cannot, that's confidential. And then the other part is that in New Jersey, but not in everywhere, you don't have to disclose murders or suicides. Anything that's psychological or social doesn't go in there. Things like if someone has AIDS, you can't put that in the disclosure. That's against the law. If there's a suicide or a murder or someone dies, it doesn't have to be disclosed. Although it's not a bad idea to disclose it because a buyer's going to find out at some point anyway. I don't know how many times someone said to me, "Do you know if anybody died in this house?" I said, "I have no idea. I mean, the house is 100 years old. There's a good chance someone died, but I can't confirm it." Things you don't have to disclose in New Jersey are there ghosts, but in California you do. So every state has different laws when it comes to disclosure laws.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jeff, my last question for this episode would be, if a brand new agent is listening today and feeling overwhelmed, what is that one mindset they must adapt before representing their first client? And what is the biggest misconception about fiduciary duty that needs to be corrected immediately?
All right. So, first thing you do is don't wait and know everything before you start. Rely on your manager, rely on if you have a mentor, rely on someone who's been in the business for a while, or call me. I'm serious. I have
Yeah.
old students that call me all the time. The next is, so do that, take a deep breath. It's not that hard. It's just remember, put yourself in your client's place. If you are the client, what would you expect? All right. That's what you need
Yes.
to know. And then last part was,
The biggest misconception about
oh,
fiduciary duty.
is the biggest misconception of fiduciary duties is understanding that your client's interests come first. And not all agents realize that. Remember, we had talked about that in other episodes. It's not the money. Best part of my job is when I'm at a closing, and this should be your best part, meaning an agent. When you're at closing, the best part is when they say, "Thank you. You found this house for us. It's great." Or "Thank you. You sold this house, which we didn't think we could sell." That's the best part, that you did your job. And as a new agent, you're going to make mistakes, and it's going to happen. Just be careful, right? Just understand the mistakes will be made and rely on other people to help you out. That's why you have a broker. That's why you're a manager. Don't think you could do everything by yourself.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. And today's conversation clarifies something essential. Fiduciary duty and fair housing are not checkboxes, they are foundational responsibilities. But here's the next question: if agents misunderstand these principles, who is responsible? Is it the agent, the broker, the training system, or the continuing education structure? You answer us for that. And in our next episode, we will tackle and know more about brokers, accountability, and ongoing education. We'll explore broker oversight bits, training expectations versus reality, and why continuing education often fails to create real competence. Jeff, would that work?
It would work with me, Anisha.
Okay. So now, Jeff, it's time for you to say the tagline. Do you
Oh,
want me to repeat it?
yeah. We could do it together.
I'll tell you what the exact line is. It is,
Uh,
until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep talking about real estate. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep. Until next time, keep learning, keep
Keep
growing,
growing. And
keep talking about real estate. Close enough?
thank you. Yes. Thank you so much, Jeff.
That was my pleasure, Anisha. It's always good to see you, and have a great week. See you next week.